my mom is here. Hey, mom.
Oh, what's up, mama?
Hey. Well, let's pop into some things.
Okay.
Mike, I told you this before, but I appreciate you doing this with me.
Yeah,
Um,
man.
in all honesty, like this isn't something you have to do, and I know with all the stuff going on right now, this is hard. Like this isn't easy stuff to talk about. Um, yeah, things are pretty crazy. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Um,
man. Of course.
Getting your friendship, yeah, over the last several years. So thanks for doing this. We've never done something like this before.
Yeah, man. You're welcome. You're one of my closest friends. So if you ask me something, I'm gonna try to make a way to do it for sure.
So if because I don't know who's watching this, but my name's Carlos. So I'm a pastor at a church in Arlington, Texas, leading groups here at Fielder Church. Also help people start micro churches, like house churches, and have a group of people that we are discipling there. Um, Mike, I knew, and we became friends here on staff at this church, and it was pretty crazy because like a couple of weeks ago, we've just been Marco Poloing like every day,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
talking
yeah.
to each other about everything that's going on, and we have conversations about race and culture and different stuff that's happening all the time. But I know that there's a lot of people that either don't have these conversations or they haven't been a part of conversations like that with people that are of different ethnicities or races or cultural backgrounds than them. And so, really, this is we just want to let some other people into conversations that we have pretty frequently.
Yeah.
And and honestly, like we were talking a lot before George Floyd happened, about a mob,
Hmm.
and then it's just crazy. It just got crazy. So we
Yeah.
knew we knew we wanted to. I know I wanted to try to say more and speak up more, and equip folks that are around me to have conversations like this and be equipped with what the Bible says about everything that's going on. So, what about you,
Yeah,
Mike?
man.
Who are you?
Who am I? I'm Mike. Yeah, man. I met Carlos on staff at Fielder a few years ago. About a year and a half ago, me and my wife relocated to the Austin area, and I work in civil engineering. So that's what my undergraduate degree is in, man. But I'm really just passionate about man, just talking about racial reconciliation and racial justice is obviously like really close to my heart. Um, and being able to like have a buddy like Carlos to be able to talk through things with and bounce ideas and stuff off of has been really beneficial, in my life. And so now being able to just hop on Facebook and talk through these things, especially right now, man, it's a crazy time in the world as I'm sure you can imagine. And so I'm glad to be able to be here and just hop on and hopefully give some perspective and insight that hopefully you can take away and do something with.
Yeah.
So
So I consider myself somewhat of a reader. Like I try to keep up with reading books and reading good books on this topic. Man, but Mike is sending me like too many books that I can keep up with. Mike is not only educated. Mike's you work at like civil engineering, right?
yeah.
But also has a theology degree
Hmm.
and is reads a ton of literature, both historical literature, theological literature, uh, political and cultural literature pertaining to race. So he's very well versed in what is out there as far as resourcing and current thought on these issues. So I really appreciate his input. For me, I just the last week, man, couple weeks, just in conversations with my own friends or people that are in our group that we have in our home, or just what I see on Facebook, I just can, you see the same things like over and over again, or you hear these comments or you hear these questions kind of come up. Like, like right now with all the protesting and riots that are happening, like people are asking, hey, why are people destroying their own communities? Or in talking about police officers, it'll be discussed. Hey, in every profession, there's a few bad apples. That's not necessarily representative of everybody. Um, I also, heard the other day somebody mentioned, okay, the cop in the George Floyd instance, he was arrested, right? So why are people still protesting and upset? That's a question that comes up. And I think one of the biggest things, especially for people our age, like millennials or maybe younger people in college and Gen Z, I think they have a heart and uh, they want to be useful. There's a lot of people that want to have these conversations. That want even, man, they're like ready to do something or ready to advocate. They just don't know where to go next, or they don't know what to do. And so for me, part of this conversation is really those things. And I think a core root of it, or core idea that I'd like to kind of explain, and I just see coming up over and over again, is kind of this issue of personal responsibility versus systemic issues and systemic injustices. And if you just look on Facebook, if you look at the comments that people see, you'll pretty quickly see the perspective or the paradigm that they have. They like pit these two things against one another. And it makes it difficult because of that for people to have meaningful conversations, because they're coming from this paradigm of, okay, got to be personal. Like, I don't want to be a racist. Like,
Right.
this is an
Right.
individual issue versus, man, there's structures and policies and culture, and other people are talking on these levels. Like, for me, that's one of the big things that leads me to have this conversation even publicly. And for the people in my friend group, uh, what about you? Like, what brings you to kind of speak up in this?
Yeah, man, because it's deeply personal for me, to be honest. Like, the first thing about that is, like, as a believer, as a follower of Jesus Christ, as someone who claims Christianity as the banner I'm supposed to live my life under, I always want to make sure I'm living in a way that reflects the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I think for a long time in the Black church,
Mhm.
um, being a follower of Jesus Christ and being in the Black church meant being able to speak to these type of issues, speak
Yeah.
to racial justice, speak to social justice, all of these things, because it was integral in the way that we live. So thinking about, man, you think about like how critical a guy like Martin Luther King, a pastor, was to the civil rights movement. He was the pastor of a church, was the central figure in progressing rights for African Americans for 20 years. And so I think, like, man, talking about these things and being a part of these things, like trying to harness in that Black church tradition that I come from, and wanting to continue to maintain and push those type of conversations and stuff forward, is really why I'm like kind of excited to just hop on and chop it up about a few things today. So
Yeah. Um, I know this is hard, but I think people need to hear this. And I know, like, this is really raw right now, but just
yeah.
with everything that's going on, how are you feeling?
Mm.
Um, like, how are you doing right now? I even think, and I want you to be as real as you can, or, at least comfortable with, because we're on
Yeah, yeah,
Facebook.
yeah.
But man, I know the difficult. I mean, I don't personally, but it just has to be so hard in the middle of conversations about Ahmad. And then I mean, it's like on top of one another. I can't imagine the feeling, the fear. Just, I don't know if you can speak to just kind of what you're going through right now.
Man, I told some people this yesterday, but man, the last week has probably been the most mentally and emotionally like exhausting week of my life. And I'm not like exaggerating. Like, I'm trying to think back on other weeks of my life that have been this like mentally and emotionally exhausting. The first thing that comes to my mind is even something related to this in 2016, right after were killed, and then we had those riots in downtown Dallas. I felt like that was a heavy week, but this week has felt even weightier than that. And it's probably like a mix of things that is causing that, right? It's like, as Black people, we have constantly been screaming like Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Like, we want you to see us, we want you to hear us, because we've been dealing with these things in our communities. Like the Ahmaud Arbery thing, man, for some reason, and that one just hit different. It was like, man, maybe it's because we're in the midst of a quarantine with all the coronavirus and everything going on, but that one in particular like hit different, where it was like, ooh, and that one hit even closer to home. And maybe it's because he's closer to my age.
Hmm.
I'm 27 years old. He's only a couple years younger than me, and like, he was exercising when he was shot, something that we do on a daily basis. So having that and that weighty thing and having to think through, man, again, another one of us. And I felt that. It was like another one of our brothers in our community has become a hashtag for seemingly no reason. And dealing through that and processing the emotions. And then, like the week after that, we had the Breonna Taylor incident. I think Breonna Taylor just kind of got lost in the middle. I want to speak her name too, because her life was lost as well. And then having those things and video of a police officer having his knee on somebody's neck for 10 minutes, man, and he's crying, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And calling for his mother. Seeing a grown man call for his mother, man, that's like tough. That's hard to go through. And then so for me, as someone who wants to be involved in these type of conversations, someone that wants to be active and speak his mind into this, having to parse through all of those emotions at once, and then wanting to be able to communicate as well. When you reach out, I want to be able to communicate. When other brothers in Christ reach out, I want to be able to communicate that. So trying to deal with my own emotions kind of in that, and at the same time trying to put on this face and put on this strong mask was just like exhausting and weighty for me this week. And I love being on this right now, but just being honest, like it's been just a taxing week for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What has been, and I know this is going to be raw, and this is
Okay.
maybe
Let's do it.
what has been just your feeling or thoughts when you have heard the feedback from a lot of white people about what's happening or the questions that they're asking you?
One thing one thing I think about is like so on one hand, there are a lot of people that are reaching out to me like, hey, give me resources, help me think through this. And the first thing that comes to my mind, like as raw as this may be, is like, why now? Right? It's like, why are you reaching out to me now? I've been talking about this for a minute now. I've been thinking through these things and trying to communicate. So many Black Christians and Christian organizations have been talking about like the systemic issues of injustice, and it's like, man, is it just because you saw the video now? Even though, like, do you not take us at our word? Do you not take us when we've been saying for years, like, these things matter to us? Do you not see me? Do you not hear me? Do you not feel me? And then on the flip side of those things that where I've seen like negative comments about like that have seemed to be like kind of dismissing the fact that another Black body has been innocently killed and highlighting more of the protest and the looting and stuff. It's like, man, we're doing it again. We're going through these same things again, but we're screaming, but you're not hearing us. You're trying to focus the issues and telling us how we can express like our emotions. And I just want to like I take the Kingian approach, right, to protest, where I want to be peaceful protest, but the anger and the rage and the exhaustion and the fear that so many of us have been feeling for so long, the stress that so many of us have been feeling for so long, it's kind of like it's a soda can that's just been shaking and shaking and shaking and shaking, and you opened it. It's got open with Ahmaud Arbery. It was shaking and shaking and shaking, and then George Floyd, and it just popped open, and all of these emotions. Man, it's just, man, I want people to see like how hard this has been for us, how much like we can look and see Ahmaud and be like, that could have been me. That could have been me running around and going on a daily jog. Man, think about George Floyd. Man, that could have been me. It could have been one of us, one of my cousins, one of my brothers. And the mental trauma over generations that Black people have had, this fear of law enforcement, this fear of being suppressed like all the time. We carry that weight with us all the time. And then after all of this, to continue to like get feedback about like I don't understand and like pointing the attention elsewhere, it's like difficult to kind of think through right now. So I don't know if I answered your question, man, but that's just
Yeah.
Matt.
Oh, that's good. Thanks for
Yeah,
sharing. Um,
yeah.
Amidst all of that, I know, man, I know you're a believer. I know your heart,
Yeah,
I know your love for the
absolutely.
gospel. Um, and in a time where things are just so, just like it's so chaotic and so hurtful, like what is it, or where are you drawing your hope from? Like, are there specific passages that you're pointing to, or uh, stories in school? Like, what is that spring that you tend to be drawing from right now to give you inspiration and hope amidst all of this?
Yeah, I think about, man, the Psalms. Some of the Psalms have really I found like refuge in right now. Psalm 13, specifically Psalm 13, where it's like, how long, O Lord, will you am I gonna go unheard? But at the end it talks about, but my hope is in the Lord and his salvation. And so every time I find myself in these like dark places of like, man, I don't know how to think through this. I don't know how to like deal with this. I don't know what to do with my anger and this frustration. I always go back to the scriptures, because it seems like throughout the biblical narrative, there's always this point to what Jesus is going to do at the end. Like, no matter the hurt that we feel, the oppression, the marginalization that we feel, that at the end, Jesus is going to take care of it all.
That's right.
It's like, no matter, like, I might not see it in my lifetime. That's what Dr. King talked about the night before he was assassinated. It was like, I've seen the promised land. I might not get there with you, but one day we as a people are going to get there. And I think about that with all creation, what about like all the evil and the things that we go through in this world. The end of the story has already been written.
That's
The
right.
end of the story has already been written, and that's where my hope lies right now. That no matter what I face here, no matter what difficulties and persecution I may face here on this earth, my hope is not in somebody like us making like the best place for me to live right now. My hope is that heaven's gonna come down one day, and that we're gonna have like true peace, true tranquility, and the things that we're hopeful for is gonna be realized at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's cool how you tie like that sense of hope to the future reality that we see in scripture. I mean, when you look at the book of Revelation, um,
Yeah,
it talks about this place that's a new city, which cities are societies. Like there's systems inside of cities. There's a new city, there's a new heaven, there's a new earth, this new Jerusalem's coming down. If you go look at like Revelation 21, you can look throughout Revelation, you see this multitude of people from all tribes, all nations, all languages worshiping Jesus together. And man, I think a lot of people, Christians and non-Christians, like maybe you're watching this now and you haven't decided to follow Jesus yet. So first of all, I'm glad you're watching this. But I think it's really important that we realize like the Bible talks about this stuff. And not just like a side thing or side issue here or there. Like there's a narrative of systems of oppression and injustice woven throughout the entire scripture. And that's why like when you think about Martin Luther King, when you think about the abolitionist movement, that they drew from this
right,
narrative,
right,
like, and that's what not only gave them hope, but gave them the confidence to step in and to be activists, to do something about it,
right.
because I saw that in the Word of God. Um, and I think a lot of even the questions that I mentioned before that I'm hearing in America, we're so individualistic. Like we always think about the
Mm-hmm.
individual. Even when we think about racism, we think about individual racism. A lot of people don't like to, or that makes them uncomfortable talking about systems of racism or systemic injustice. And even when we look at the good news of Jesus and the gospel, we tend to think of one side of the coin, like I'm a sinner, and this is all completely true. I'm a sinner. Like I can't make myself right before God, but Jesus lived a perfect life. He died on the cross. He rose again so that I could have new life. And that's completely accurate. But there's another side of that gospel coin, which is systems, and which is like, it's all of culture. Like in the very beginning, like God not only created Adam and Eve, but he created economic systems, and he created religious systems and political systems and social systems. And when sin happened, like that affected all of that. And
Yeah,
so So you can look throughout the Bible. Again, if you're not familiar with reading scripture, you can look throughout the Bible and you see how sin, how selfishness and pride, it not only affects individuals, but it affects policies, it affects religion, it affects everything. Like there's the Tower of Babel, that's a society that wants to be like God. And then there's Egypt, and they're oppressing God's people and making them build the bricks themselves that they were enslaved to build these monuments. Which again, abolitionist movements, the civil rights movement have drawn a lot, from like the book of Exodus, even particularly because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And throughout the Old Testament, you see even God's very own people, like they say they want to have a just society, and they'll do it for a season and then fall away. They build a kingdom and it looks like it's going to be good, and it looks like there's good policies, and it looks like they're treating people righteously, but then they end up going into the same negative systems, the same injustices that all the other nations around them were doing. You and I have talked a lot about, I'll let you talk about this, but you and I have talked about
Uh-oh.
how
Uh-oh.
how important for us, like even our own theology and view of the gospel, that Ephesians chapter 2 has been for us. Um, because when Jesus comes onto the scene, he not
Yeah.
only makes a way for us to be right with God, but he makes a way to bring in a new kingdom, a new way of living for societies that are just. Um, and Ephesians 2, for me, it's maybe my favorite chapter in the Bible. It shows both sides of that coin. Like,
Yeah, it does.
we personally are right with Jesus, but then also, like, as people, as communities, as societies, like Jesus makes a way for us to be made right with him.
You want me to talk about it?
I've been going off on a
Yeah, man.
Bible
Ephesians
rant.
2,
It's your
when it
turn.
talks about, it's my turn. Yeah. And think about Ephesians 2, man, when it talks about how Jesus has broken down the dividing wall of hostility between Jews and Gentiles and created like a new people, like we are a new creation. And so like part of like why Jesus was here and his work on the cross and what he is trying to accomplish in this world is bringing the two together. And I think for a lot of people that's hard to kind of connect, but that's what Jesus has called us to do. Paul talks about how we're supposed to be ministers of reconciliation, how so we're supposed to go forth and be ambassadors of reconciliation to bring Jesus' kingdom here on earth. As Christians, part of our responsibility, we talk about the vertical relationship of that being restored with God, but we also got to talk about the horizontal relationship on what Jesus is trying to accomplish in the world, right? He's trying to allow us to break down these dividing walls, break down these systems of oppression so that we can be one people underneath his kingdom. And
Mhm.
so when people talk about how they don't know if like social justice and those type of things are part of the biblical narrative, I always point back and I'm like, man, that's what Jesus did. And that's what Jesus calls us to do as followers of him. They say they don't know us based on our head knowledge of the Bible, on how like well we can exegete the text. No, people are going to know that we're his disciples by the way that we love one another. And I
Yeah.
think about how, man, how Black Christians have just felt unloved and unseen so often by some of our white brothers and sisters in Christ. That we believe the same things about the Bible, we believe the same things about Jesus Christ, but when it comes to living out that gospel message, so often it feels like we're being stifled, like we're lesser than. And when I think about what it means to be a true follower of Christ, man, we should be exalting those that are lower than us, right? Paul talks about consider others more significant than yourself. Like, so we see over and over again, like throughout the biblical narrative, through modeling just even what Jesus did, and then thinking through how what Paul has talked about on how we're supposed to live out this life. And James talking about true religion is caring for orphans and widows. All of these times we think about systems and correcting oppression so that we can live as one people. And when we talk about loving others the way we love ourselves, that means hearing each other's stories. That means seeing when each other are hurting. And that's what a lot of us are looking for right now. It's just for people to hear us, to hear our stories, to hear where we're coming from, to hear our hurt, to hear our pain, and to say, brother, I see you. Brother, I see you hurting. And I want to give you a voice that you haven't had before because your voice and your perspective is necessary. Because
Yeah.
we feel like that's kind of what Jesus would do. And I think I'm rambling now, but even in like the Black Christian tradition, like that has been so often like put in front of us about like exalting those who are lowly and all of those things, and that's what we're looking for right now, man.
Yeah, I mean that's just a clear picture of the way that Jesus lived when he walked on earth,
Yeah,
like ministry.
yeah,
Like even you talked about, man, I want to. You mentioned this, like as a Black person, I want to be seen
yeah,
and heard, and like I want you to have empathy and feel what I feel. When you look at what Jesus's ministry actually was, when he healed the lepers, what he was doing is he was going to the people who were the most outcast in the society.
right,
And when he had close relationships with Mary and Martha, and women were the first people to come to the tomb of Jesus. Like Jesus
yeah,
is validating women in a society, in a system which was
right,
unjust towards these types of people. Jesus crosses, ethnic boundaries.
yep,
Uh, he says like there's this whole region of Samaria, a different people group that Jewish people they like walk around because
yeah,
they didn't want to be near these people. And Jesus says, no, I have to go through there.
yeah,
And then goes up to a woman who's a Samaritan in the middle of the day. He goes to the people who nobody else wants to talk to, the people that have been disregarded, and he sees them and he enters into that with them. And I think that just that approach of ministry, man, I think for those of us who have been in predominantly white churches and white spaces need to learn from
mm,
the Black church and from those that are living in those environments, that are with people that are oppressed, that are marginalized, that are immigrants, that are minorities. That was Jesus's ministry, and we are missing the power in the gospel if we're not living that way and we're not seeing those people and we're not engaged in people's lives that are just different than ours.
yeah, yeah, yeah. One thing I think about, man, a lot of people will bring up, predominantly white churches for sure. Will also bring up about like, hey, we need to become multi-ethnic, so we need to hire like a Black person on staff, right? We need to hire this person so they can, help us become multi-ethnic and stuff. And man, what I really think about is, man, we need to recognize that we need relationships with different people,
That's
right?
right.
We need relationships with different people to help us grow. I think about me, man. I need you in my life because you offer like a perspective and an idea, different, places you have been, all those things. You offer that to me. It's something that I don't have. So if I don't have you in my life, I'm not as good of a husband to my wife. I'm not as good of a follower of Jesus Christ because you bring so much to my life just by being who you are. And so when I think about when people talk about like, man, I don't want it to be tokenist. I just don't want to hire like just another Black person. I'm like, yeah, because you have to come to the place where you recognize that you truly, truly need these people to speak into your lives. Because if we get there, then it won't be tokenism. If you can see people for who they are, for the value that they bring, and be able to bring them into your lives and walk alongside of you, into your churches, into your homes, all of these things, like, man, that's how we are seen as valuable. Not just the people that you go to on Martin Luther King Sunday, not just the people that you go to when you want to learn about racial reconciliation, but the people that you need in your life just based on their different experiences,
Yeah.
and I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of the Black community, but that would like go a long way in us feeling heard and us feeling
Yeah.
seen because you recognize, people talk about being colorblind and things like that. And they're like, bro, see who I am, see the experiences, see that I have a Black wife too, and that she brings a lot of like value in things, and the things that she has gone through in her life is different from what other people of other women of different ethnicities have gone to. Like those things are valuable, and we need to see each other as gifts.
Yeah.
Jesus made, God made us so that we can be in community with one another, and we need each part of the body to be a true body. We need all the different members. So
Yeah. I man, I'm really resonating just with that idea of community and the need that we have for other people in our lives that are different
yeah,
than us. Like you bring something to my life that I can't get elsewhere. Like you're going
right,
to help me grow in ways that I can't grow unless not just that I hear from you, but I'm like in deep relationship
right,
with you. And again, that is so hard in a society that is so focused on the self and is about my own needs. And I'll look at you like, what can you give me for my own self fulfillment?
Yeah.
And then what happens is we end up, I'll just say it, I'll say it straight.
Say it straight, man.
So many people just look, to black people for entertainment. Like,
Mm,
hey, yeah, those are my favorite sports players and my favorite musician and my favorite artist, and they can entertain me and fulfill that part in my life.
mm,
Or a lot of times we look at people as charity or a charity case, like I need to go help.
mm.
I need to go help those people rather than that people that are different than me. And I'll even say specifically that African Americans have something to bring into my life that is of value, that will teach me, that will enrich me, and that I will enrich them. Like, because that's the body of Christ. And not
Yeah.
only does that help us, like you and me together, and diverse community, but man, like, what is a better picture to this world right now of what Jesus can do for us than seeing people that are of different ethnicities that have different backgrounds in that type of relationship with one another?
Yeah.
Because people don't get that anywhere else, and they should be getting that in the church.
Yeah. If nowhere else, they should be getting it in the church.
um, and that's where I'm just like, it's not a side issue, it's not a side project. It's great for our community, but man, when people see that lived out, I truly believe one of the greatest uh, evangelistic efforts, the greatest thing to show people the greatness of Jesus is for a community of people to be drastically different than one another and love each other wholeheartedly and give to one another, be submit to one another, and not be trying to one up or, man, whatever that is. That is such a great picture of the gospel to the world that so many of us are missing because we're not really in deep relationship with people that are different than us.
Yeah.
Um, so here's a question, and there's stuff written on this, but there's always this tension, between evangelism, like, okay, like I just mentioned, the community being an apologetic, really showing
Mm.
other people the gospel. But there's a tension sometimes between personal evangelism and social justice, and which one is more important, or which one do I work for? And we put these kind of as two different ends of a spectrum. Just want to ask you, like, which one do you focus on, Mike? Is it
Man,
like,
I think if we want to have a true biblical perspective on evangelism and social justice, it's a and. It's a both and. We can't emphasize one over the other, like personal evangelism and social justice. Like both of those things are key to the gospel, right? We aren't able to get to the place of like spending eternity with God without like a personal relationship with Him. But in the same way as we are called to live out what it means to be disciples of Jesus Christ on this earth, we are called to love like Jesus loved. Stand up for the people that are oppressed, stand up for those things. And so too often we try to like have a dichotomy between these things rather than bridging them together and saying, yeah, I can do both at the very same time. Like I'm going to be able to focus on evangelism and having a good gospel presentation and all of those things, but I'm also going to go out and vote in my community because those things matter. I'm also going to stand up for those that are oppressed because those things matter too. So having this constant, I don't want to say tension, but there should be like this blended harmony between both of those, where we're constantly like doing both of those things at the same time. And I think the church misses out when we try to emphasize one over the other. It's not Republican or Democrat, right? As a Christian, we need to be able to blend both of those worlds and say like, yo, like I'm gonna have a conviction of this Bible that I'm going to stand on, but I'm also gonna have just this great compassion for people because that's what Jesus had as well.
yeah. Um, I mentioned, and we've talked about kind of the Bible and these systems or these systemic issues, which of course, is a big conversation, right now. Um, I'd love for you to talk about, and I know this is going to step on some toes. I'll
Uh-oh.
do it with you, but there are historical facts. There are historical things that happened that have shown there are systems in place, and there's systems that have been in place that have disenfranchised and that have oppressed African Americans in this country. I know, again, I know we read some of the same things, listen to some of the same things, but dude, you're like way ahead of me.
No, no, no.
But could you outline just some of the different areas or some of the different issues that our nation has experienced that have shown systemic issues of injustice?
I'll try. I'll do the best I can. Right. I'm not a
like this is whole books, so it's like
yeah. I'm not a historian. You can point to other people to get a full like history lesson and stuff. But man, when I think about this topic, when I think about like systems that are in place, systematic things that are in place in America that have disenfranchised Black and Brown people, I think about even the foundations of like how America started, right? I think if we don't start there, we're missing like a huge part of this narrative about systems and stuff. So, like Europeans came over to this country, with this idea of this exceptionalistic mindset, where it's like we're going and conquering this new land and calling it our own. The problem with that is that there were people there. There were people there that were made in the image of God, Native Americans specifically. So these Europeans have come over to America and are taking this land through force, taking this land through force of these people. And already you're talking about devaluing the image of God in indigenous peoples because they had no say in this. Europeans come over and take by force this land. And then to start building their economy, they needed to get free labor. And so that's where you go over and they get the slaves from Africa. And so just a side note, I think it's interesting that Black people in this country are the only ones that didn't have a choice in being here.
Yeah.
You think about Europeans and stuff that have come over that have immigrated, even people nowadays from Central America and, all these different places from Africa that are coming over. But my ancestors didn't have a choice in coming over here. And that goes in, different conversation for a different day when we talk about patriotism and all that type of stuff. But going back to the story, bringing Black people over here and putting them under chattel slavery. And it's like, once we were emancipated, there were still things that were trying to oppress us and keep us down. So you think about like in the Reconstruction era, after the slaves were emancipated, you think about when the rise of the KKK, and really that's where the police force really started back then, trying to put down African Americans, put them in their place, so they wouldn't get to this place of rising to the place of white folks in this country. And you see that like that narrative constantly coming through. You see when Black people started having more opportunities in political spaces and educational spaces in the early 20th century, then you see the Jim Crow regulations start coming in, where people are being put down constantly about like segregated in schools and segregated workplaces and all these type of things that are trying to disenfranchise Black people. And then you have like the civil rights movement that comes out, and there's another part where Black people are trying to advance. And then there's another wave of oppression that starts when you talk about educational systems and poverty in this country, where it's no surprise that the worst education places are in the worst educational systems are in the poorest places, and they also are in the places with minorities. And we can talk about, redlining and things like that, government regulations where they separated these communities in different areas where the Black people were living over here and the white people were living over here, and like different regulations and housing laws and all those type of things that come up throughout American history, where it's always like Black people are fighting against this system that wasn't built to make us equals in the first place, right? And that starts at the very beginning, this thread of white supremacy, of not wanting Black people to come to the place of equality. But there's always like this push of pushing us down, it seems like, throughout American history. And that leads into the day, like all of those things are connected. When we see these incidents, I think of Ahmaud Arbery, right? When Ahmaud Arbery was killed, that happened in February.
Yeah.
And the people that killed him were still quarantining like everybody else for 2 months. They were chilling in their homes for 2 months, just chilling, because there is a system in place that allowed loopholes when you talk about like citizens arrest. There's loopholes that allowed them to go free, even though they killed this innocent Black man. And there's I think a district attorney or something that they talked about, told them not to arrest these men. And so there's these systems that are in place that seem to always put us down, that are always like seem to push against us. And so like we can't ignore those things when we talk about racial justice in this country,
Yeah.
when we talk about social injustice, because it's not just these individual acts of racism. It's there's these systems in place that are linked to education, that are linked to poverty, that are linked to police brutality. All of those things are interconnected, and we can't just separate those things and not act like the whole doesn't matter. The
Yeah.
whole absolutely matters. So
When people say, or when you say, uh, there are issues of systemic oppression and systemic racism, what a lot of white people hear is that you're saying that all white people are racist.
mm,
I,
that's not
that
what I'm saying.
I, can you explain a little more the difference between that? Because you see that all the time. Is as soon as somebody starts talking about systemic issues, cultural issues, even things like white privilege,
Mm,
um, a lot of white people will take that as, man, you're calling me a racist because you're talking about systemic or cultural issues there.
interesting.
What,
Um,
what's the difference there?
yeah, I don't think every white person is racist, right? I don't believe that, right? I think there are people that are very overtly racist, and some people that are kind of undercover racist as well. But I but I don't think all white people are racist. But what I do think when we talk about systems, I think it's important to make sure that we have a clear understanding of our history in this country,
Yeah,
because there are systems that are set in place where yes, we can both struggle. Me and a white person can both struggle to get to where we want to be in this country, but the way things were set up from the get go, the white person is not going to be pushed down because of the color of their skin. And I think that's the difference when we talk about white privilege. I'm not saying that you're racist. I'm not saying that you have done something overtly, but I'm saying that some of the benefits that you may have in this country is because of the color of your skin. And the type of the things that I struggle with are because of the color of my skin. And so it's not this whole thing that all whites are racist, but we just want you to see the world how we've been seeing it for so long, how our people have been put down, how like there's so many things that are in place that are seemingly trying to keep us down. Like, man, it's just, yeah, we just want people to see that.
so what are this is just a question I got the other day, but what are some of the things, um again, this is gonna be a this is gonna be a tough one. What
Uh-oh.
are some of the things that white people have said, even with good intentions, that has been demeaning or maybe even unhelpful towards this conversation? Because I think there's a lot of people, like you said, they're not racist. They have good intentions, but they unknowingly, ignorantly say and do things that are not helping move the conversation forward. Where have you seen that happen?
Yeah, I think of two things right off the bat. The first thing I think about is, and I think we talked about a little bit about this earlier, when people talk about, I'm colorblind. I don't see color. I want to, everybody's equal in my eyes. Like that's good and all. That seems noble. That seems like a good thing to say. But if you don't see that I'm an African American man, if you don't see that and are able to understand the history of this country, on how this country was formed, on how for a long time the color of my skin, like the way I was born, like pushed me whether I was going to be a slave or free, right? Like you don't have a choice where you're like who you're born into. Like you're born into a black family or a white family or what Hispanic, whatever. Like just because I was born for a long time in this country meant that I would be a slave. And so, like for when we talk about being colorblind, like it's not helpful because it doesn't acknowledge the truth and reality of these situations that we live in and go through on a daily basis. And
Yeah,
we have to be able to see each other's differences. God made our differences. God made us in different ethnicities and different cultures and in different parts of the world for a reason. And we're supposed to be able to add things to one another. And so when you say that we're colorblind, we have to kind of get that out of our vocabulary, right? We have to start seeing people for who they are, and not as a way to like differentiate from one another, but to celebrate like the differences that God has made in the first place. Like those things are true. My skin is darker than your skin, and that's just a fact of life. And but that also has implications for a lot of things, and we have to be able to talk through those things. That's one thing I think about that isn't helpful. Man, another thing, um, man, right now, um, and this might step on some toes too. um, but thinking through like what are we focusing on in the midst of these protests, in the midst of, man, unfortunately, these riots that have turned dangerous, these riots that have turned violent. Um, what are we focusing on? I think about, we want to make sure that we're focusing on the root cause to why these things kind of started in the first place. Like these
Yeah.
riots and stuff happen because Black people have felt like they've been under attack for a long time in this country. And sometimes you can get to the point where we start acting out and lashing out because we have experienced trauma, right?
Mhm.
If we aren't dealing with the trauma behind the actions, then we're just, you're not really getting to the root of the problem, right? Black people have experienced stress and trauma in this country. And so when we turn this narrative right now in the news, when we talk about, we're focusing on so much violence in the protests, right? So much looting. Let's not forget that Black bodies have been looted for 400 years in this country. Let's not forget that that is a big reason why we're protesting right now. It's not this one isolated incident, right? And somebody else said that. I don't take credit for saying that Black
Oh
people have
man,
been looted,
man,
right? I stole that.
that
But
is good.
it's true. Our bodies have been looted for so long in this country, acting like we don't deserve a right to live, that we're
Yeah.
getting killed because we run different, like because of the color of my skin, man. And that's like, so for a white person, it's like, man, if I could express in words like the trauma and stuff that Black people go through when they're trying to, when they have to think about, man, I'm going to work today. I have to make sure I drive in the right neighborhoods. I don't want to be seen in the wrong neighborhoods. And there's like this underlying stress that Black people in this country have always dealt with, and that's not going away. You know, it's like there's almost like this always this underlying tension and stress and rage that we live in because we have seen what happens when you're running in the wrong neighborhoods.
Mhm.
We've seen what happened when you write a bad check or have a counterfeit $20 bill. We've seen what happens when you have Skittles in your pocket. We've seen what happens when you're chilling in your apartment watching TV and somebody comes in and thinks it's their apartment. Like those things we live with, and we're always in this state of wondering if I'm going to be next. If I'm going to be the next one that's in the wrong place at the wrong time, and my name is going to become a hashtag. And that's like a tension that we always live in this country.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep going with something Elizabeth Park said on here. She
Uh
was
oh.
she was
What's up,
amen.
Elizabeth?
I know she was amening we have to see the trauma behind the action,
Yeah.
and she's a counselor, so she's right on. And man, we were talking about this earlier, but I've just seen so much in this question of, man, why are people rioting and destroying and looting their own neighborhoods? And I immediately have been thinking about, if a soldier comes back and has PTSD and they've experienced a level of trauma and then begin to do things that are destructive or self-harming to themselves, we don't try to logically prove to them or show them that that's not a good idea. We
Right,
need to
right.
immediately move that person into having treatment. And what's happening right now is that there is mass trauma, there is corporate PTSD in the African American community. And unless we see the trauma and actually mourn and grieve the trauma behind what's happening, man, it's not just going to get fixed. It's not a why are you looting or why are you hurting yourself? No, it's we need to fix the issues, and we need to fix the issues that are causing the trauma,
Yeah,
that are providing the reasons for the rioting and the reasons for the looting. Martin Luther King said that the rioting is the voice of the unheard.
right, right.
Uh, and that's why we have to show people that, man, we hear you. You said this earlier. We see you, and have empathy and begin to feel, and as much as we can, empathize with the trauma that's behind what we're seeing.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good, man. That's really good.
Man, I thought this was a really good question I heard the other day as well. Again, a lot of people with great intentions that want to help and that want to advocate. How can particularly white people have conversations with their Black friends without them feeling like either like a charity, or without them feeling or without them re-traumatizing even their Black friends?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the re-trauma thing is particularly like right now.
Yeah,
Right now with everything going on in the country, like Black people are hurting, right? And sometimes like allowing us a little bit of space to breathe. Like I know so many of my brothers and sisters want to be able to be like spokespersons and be able to speak up right now, but and have like these great formulated discussions and arguments and stuff. But we're just hurting right now, you know. And so giving us a little bit of space to breathe sometimes. I think when we think about the re-trauma, is like don't always just rush to that Black person when you want information about racial reconciliation. Like I was saying this a little earlier, I think it's like, yo, you can go to Google too. Like there are resources and things out there that you can look for, and we can talk about a little bit more of the resources and stuff later. But allowing us to heal right now, I think is a good thing. Just allowing us the space and the time to kind of just heal. And then I think about when you say the charity, like going to a Black person and not seeing it as charity. I think it goes back to a little bit we were saying earlier of seeing Black people as equals,
yeah,
not as someone that you go to try to make yourself feeling better, right? It's not about helping you feel better. Sometimes you need to go to a Black person and just hear what they have to say. And when you leave, you might be upset, and that's okay. You might be upset with this Black person had to say, but they're expressing their feelings and their emotions and the way that they see their lives. And you need to be able to see that as something that's valuable, despite how it makes you feel, you know? So
yeah. So what I'll ask this first because I have two big questions. One, just what do we do? Where do we go from here? And then I know we want to throw out some resources for people to continue, but are there any questions that you find that Black friends in the African American community are struggling with or asking of white people? Because I see it a lot from one side, like this confusion or wanting to have this conversation, but that goes both ways. And I've gotten questions both ways. What are I don't know, what are some of the other things that you might have seen or struggled with, uh, or that the African American community has questions about right now?
yeah, one thing I think about is like maybe why now? Why are you reaching out to us now? Why are we going through this now, even though we've been talking about this for a long time? And why is it so hard to be able to see like that the Bible talks about social justice
Yeah,
when, in the Black church we've been talking about this for a very long time.
yeah.
I don't know if you want to answer that question or not.
Well, I mean, like neither of us speak for all.
Exactly.
You
True,
know,
true.
I speak for all white and Puerto Rican people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
It's
got
not
you.
like
I
that.
got you.
Um, but man, I just think about culturally now. There are things that are changing, um, even culturally in the age of people. So for us, even our age bracket, our generation of like we're both millennials, but millennials and Gen Z are concerned at least in word about social justice issues and what's happening out there and want to be involved. So I even think about the level of engagement you're seeing now, even on social media, is going to be different than it was 10 years ago because there's just more of us in the pool of what's being communicated and out there.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, I think there's a challenge there because I think a lot of us, and I'm guilty of this too, a lot of us will do far more in Word and put an image up or
Mm.
put Blackout Tuesday up, which I did,
Oh, yeah.
on
Blackout Tuesday. Come on.
but don't follow it up with anything else and
Mm.
actually vote differently, actually protest, sign anything, actually enter into hard conversations. It can be easy to look like, and I think we're seeing a lot of that now. There are people that are active, there are people that are doing things, but there's also a lot of people that are just throwing stuff out there that it can be a trend. And justice for African Americans is not a trend.
Amen, bro.
Um,
Amen.
it needs to not just affect things we say or things we post on social media, but actually the
Yeah.
way we live, the way that we vote, the way that we enter into conversations, the way that we lead our churches. And time's going to tell whether or not that really, if we really made movement. It looks like there's more people talking about it. We'll have to see. I think there's a generational thing. I think there's a cultural thing too about, um, Now as well, you see athletes speaking out more. You see more in media, in music. There's more cultural um, mediums that are bringing these issues to surface that particularly young people are picking up on the conversation.
Yeah,
Uh, and you're seeing that. But again, my hope, my prayer is that as the book of James would say, it's not just in word, but it's in deed as well.
absolutely.
And I think that's really the next thing. Like, how do we move this from just talking about this to what do we actually do? And again, um, white people and black people and Latinos and Asian people, there are a lot of people who want to do something. They don't know how to advocate and they don't know the steps or what to do next. What is the thing that we do? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. I'll start with this. I think throughout the biblical narrative, particularly in the Old Testament, I think about how often God is telling his people to remember.
Yeah.
I think about how often God is saying, no, remember, I think about Joshua when they crossed over the Jordan River and God was like, put up these 12 memorial stones to remember what God has done. And I think we have to do a better job at believers in particular at remembering things. So when this news cycle changes, because it will,
Yeah.
don't forget about Ahmaud Arbery. Don't forget about Breonna Taylor. Don't forget about George Floyd. Remember these things. Write it in your journal. Go back to it. Remember the feelings and the frustrations that African Americans are communicating right now. Remember all the book recommendations we are giving you right now. Like, don't forget about like all these things. Like that's like the first thing I think about is remembering, right?
Yeah.
Always remember. So when the news cycle changes, don't forget about this moment. Don't forget about this moment. And then I think just becoming aware of, man, talk to African Americans, hear their stories, hear their perspectives, listen to some black pastors, you know, listen to some black speakers, read some black books, read some black movies, read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Go watch 13 on Netflix that talks about the 13th Amendment and mass incarceration. Go read those things. Hear people's stories about how they feel and how they have lived their lives here in America. So the first thing is like coming to an awareness, and there's so many different resources we can point to. I don't know if you want to get to that now or how you want to
I was gonna say, I just thought about that as, man, get yourself educated. There,
educate yourself.
there's so much stuff out there
Yeah,
on a biblical perspective, on a historical perspective, on a sociological perspective that's out there. There are a bunch of free resources. You mentioned, man, there's
yeah.
documentaries out there. Um, but we need to educate and not just sit around and talk about it.
Yeah, and don't hear things from just one perspective,
Yeah.
right? Don't get into this place, my white pastor friends on this call, my white friends on this call, man. Look at your bookshelves. Look at
Yeah.
your bookshelves. How many black people do you have on your bookshelves?
Yeah.
How many African Americans? How many Latinos? How many Asians? How many Native Americans do you have on your bookshelves where you're hearing different perspectives?
Yeah.
Like, expand your vocabulary, expand your resources so that you can really have like good perspective on things. We can't assume that one track of theology or one track of history is the only way.
Yeah.
We think about, another discussion for another day, but even thinking about the way Christianity has developed, are we going to take always the Eurocentric model to how Christianity developed? But there was Christianity in Africa originally as well. So thinking through those resources, go back and look and read about how Christianity developed in Africa, how it developed in all these different places. Because
Mhm.
if we're always going to fish in the same ponds, we're always going to get the same type of fish. You're always going to hear the same type of perspective. So we need to go to different ponds so we can get some different fish, so we can get different perspectives in our life. So
Yeah. Um, a couple places are just ways that, man, if you want to advocate specifically for certain policies and for certain changes, as a believer, go do it. Like,
yeah, go do
enter
it.
into that space. That's not separate. Advocacy, even political advocacy, is not separate from your Christian faith. Uh,
Absolutely.
Actually, the gospel and your Christian faith should drive us to advocate for just policies. And so you can do things like go check out the AND campaign.
Mm-hmm.
You just Google that. I'll put a link later, but go look at the AND campaign. It's a community of people that are advocating for changes that value both biblical values, and social justice, which
Right.
is what the Bible speaks of. There are other petitions out there that you could sign. Protest peacefully.
Peaceful protest.
Listen, there's a grand history of believers protesting. That's not a bad thing. Do so peacefully, and we have a right to do that. And so you can protest and vote.
Yeah.
You can get educated. Be educated on the policies of your local politicians,
Yes.
of your state politicians, of your national politicians. But even I would even stress, and this is something I need to be better at, is looking at what do my city officials, what do my county officials believe? Those are actually going to affect people the most.
Right.
So research those and take that to the ballot box, and let the gospel and let what the Bible says about systemic issues drive even the way that we vote. That's a good biblical and godly thing. Other resources that are out there. I think when we're done here, Mike, we should get together and write a list so we can post these. But man, throw out some books that people should be reading right now.
Books you should be reading right now. Color of Compromise, Jamar Tisby. It talks about the relationship between the American church and racism, basically, throughout American history. It starts with the colonial times and goes all the way up to Black Lives Matter movement right now and the current situation that we're in now. So that's a really good resource that you can use. I think Latasha Morrison wrote a book, Be the Bridge. That's a really good resource. Talks about having these courageous conversations and opening up the conversations around racial reconciliation and really bridging the gap between our ethnicities, man. Anything that like Jude 3 Project puts out, like they're solid, no doubt. Jude 3 Project is Lisa Fields is the president of that organization. Man, other books you can be reading, Unsettling Truths. If you in this for real, you can read Unsettling Truths by Mark Charles and Soong Chan Ra. That's a really, really good book. It's a really historical book that really speaks into how we got to the place where we are. Eric Mason, Woke Church is a really good book to read. Man, there's a lot of.
We can put a list.
I'll put a list
because I've talked to a lot of people who haven't jumped into this type of literature before. If I'm talking to a believer who has never read anything like this before, I think Be the Bridge that you mentioned,
right.
Advocates by Dhati Lewis, and I think Woke Church from Eric Mason. I think those are some great places to start. Color of Compromise and Unsettling Truths, man, you're going to get historical facts. If you're looking more into the history and some deeper systemic issues, and those are some great ones. There's some podcasts I know that we both listen to that are out there. Pass the Mic.
Pass the Mic.
You have
Truth Table. Truth Table.
Truth Table.
Black women. Truth Table. Black women. Let me get that out there. Truth Table is really, really good. Really, really good. Truth Table is good. I even think Disruptors is a kind of a newer podcast by Esau McCaulley. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't heard of that.
Esau McCaulley is a Black Anglican priest. Like that doesn't happen very often, but but he's in kind of like the white setting, and so he kind of has that kind of perspective that he brings to the table. But he talks about just being a disruptor in these different white spaces and stuff. So, man, those are good. Even Jamar Tisby, Footnotes is a solo podcast that he puts out. Those are some that come to the top of my head.
And I know there's other stuff that we read online. The Witness, we're pretty plugged in and have gone to conferences with Legacy, which is urban disciple making.
Yeah.
We have tons of resources on their site. That's a great place to go. I mentioned the AND campaign before. They'll point you to some different resources there. And then blogs from different, authors and Black voices. Eric Mason, Leon's Crump, Tabiti Anawabali. I can never say.
I don't know how to say his name either.
Anything from Dr. Charlie Dates.
Charlie Dates is good. Yeah.
Great. Any others? Just keep up with what they're reading.
Jackie Hill Perry puts out good stuff. Yeah. She puts out good stuff for sure.
Cool. My last, I guess, just word of encouragement. One, man, if you were watching this and actually, stayed here till the end, or you're watching this later, man, if you're not familiar with the Bible's concept of justice, just because maybe you've never really looked into the Bible before, or didn't really know that the Bible spoke into these issues, man, either one of us would love to talk with you more. Like, feel free to shoot us
Absolutely.
a message. We'd set up a call like this or chat with you on Facebook. We'd love to show you just more of what the Word of God says about how people and how systems are reconciled and are brought together and brought to peace under the authority of Jesus. And so we'd love to chat with you about that more. For those of you that are out there that are advocating, I think a word that I've just had is don't lose heart. We've got to continue fighting this fight and having this conversation. And Mike, I know especially for you, and especially for our Black brothers and sisters that are pushing forward, we need to encourage them to not grow weary. We cannot
It's
grow.
hard. It's hard, man. It's hard.
And it's going to take, with how difficult it is, like I know it's going to take the very Spirit of the Lord to continue pushing these brothers and sisters forward.
Yeah.
We need to be praying for them, praying for people like Mike, praying for the people that are speaking up, praying for people that are on the front lines of bringing and seeing the kingdom of God reign over these different systemic issues that we're facing right now. And so pray that people would not grow weary. And I'm also in a posture of, again, as we've been talking about, listening to Black voices. Let our African American brothers and sisters lead out. For many of us, it's not the season for us to take over. I want to be in a posture, and I challenge you to be in a posture of humility, of listening and following, because people like Mike, pastors that we're mentioning, they've been talking about this for years, and for so many of us, like, we're just getting into the game. And so I think for each of us, don't grow weary and come to the table and advocate from a position of humility and of learning.
Yeah, man, that means a lot. That means a lot because we want to be heard. We have stories that we want to tell. We have experiences that we want you to share with us in. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, brother. All right. Well, thank you guys for jumping in here. If you have other questions or conversations we can do, feel free to comment on Facebook, or we'd love to chat with you. Send us a private message. Thanks for tuning in. God bless.
God bless.